It happened on the mysterious Isle of Seacliffe by Ian Gordon. 3. Market Day. Boxing Day, 5:30 p.m. What a strange day indeed. Having descended into Redditch from what I later learned was called Watcher's Peak, I made my way to the large central square, upon which I'd observed the assembly of stalls and kiosks from above. Along the way, I exchanged glances with a handful of locals I encountered, and was pleasantly surprised to receive warm, friendly greetings in return. One especially elderly gent went so far as to tip his hat, accompanied by a guttural grunt in a dialect much too broad for me to discern. Accordingly, I returned a genial good morning and continued on my merry way. Reaching the precinct, or market square, I blundered into the midst of things, my eyes drawn to the numerous booths and huts. Evidently, Boxing Day in Redditch was market day, and, judging by the copious amounts of food being prepared left, right, and centre, it was a day in which the locals indulged in culinary excess. I saw sausages and bacon, lamb and mutton, carrots and turnips, sprouts and pickles, vats of mulled wine and bubbling cider, Yule logs and mince pies, flans and brownies. Though for a seaside town on an island in the North Sea, there was a curious lack of seafood on display. None at all, in fact. My senses were overwrought, and, still hungry following the precarious journey along the cliffs and the bite-sized turkey sandwich I devoured atop Watcher's Peak, I immediately withdrew my wallet and ordered myself a plump sausage bap, positively bursting with stuffing, and haphazardly smeared with cranberry sauce. So hungry was I, in fact, that I failed to acknowledge the complete and utter indifference with which the marketeers and milling locals regarded me. Don't get me wrong, the vendors bowed and the shoppers grinned, but I felt as though I was being treated much in the way another local might be, like just another member of the community. Wasn't it plain to see that I was an outsider? Wasn't it clear that I lacked the distinctive ruggedness that each and every face I encountered possessed? I was aware of other settlements on the isle, but I was reasonably sure that the inhabitants of those places would be well acquainted with Redditch and its denizens. Then again, it is difficult to be reasonably sure about anything with regards to Seacliffe. Moving between the stalls, I was impressed by the effort each of the respective marketeers had made in adorning his or her kiosk. The expected seasonal furnishings were present in most cases: wreaths and colourful garlands, boastful trees and bright lights, miniature cottages and street scenes sprinkled with artificial snow. But there were other elements too, outre elements, wooden carvings depicting malformed crabs and crayfish, clay statues portraying squat creatures with the heads of cephalopods, and vast eight-sided plates. At the centre of each was engraved a tentacled, kraken-like creature with the face of what I guessed was a pollock or coalfish. This depiction, whatever it was, seemed incongruous with the quiet townsfolk and the innocuous market. But then I glanced at the Christmas tree, towering above the stalls in the middle of the square. Topping it, which had been indistinguishable from Watcher's Peak, was the head of a fish, the same fish as depicted on the plates. I am all but certain that this creature, this symbol, the 8-tentacled monstrosity with the head of a coalfish, represents the subject of worship here on Seacliffe, the Sleeping King, after which the sect, the Order of the Sleeper, is named. The indifference displayed by the locals had its downside. Though they appeared to be more than happy for me to go about my business, the individuals I attempted to connect with were unwilling to enter into conversation with me. Even the marketeers, after collecting my money and serving up the goods, would retreat into the shadows, where they remained unapproachable. And so I slipped away from the market square and sought the Golden Crab, the only pub in Redditch, or so I'd been informed, that offered accommodation. Owing to the irregularity of visitors to the island, I was afraid that I might be turned away, forced to seek shelter in some abandoned building or shack. But, fortunately, upon locating the pub, I was welcomed into its dark and humid belly, and was provided with a suite without much ado. The landlady, Annie Black was the name she gave, was more than happy to provide me with lodging, on condition that, and it didn't come as a surprise, I keep myself to myself, and keep engagements with the pub regulars to a minimum. Friendly though she was, I felt that the smile she wore was somewhat superficial, that the smile every resident of Redditch I'd encountered wore was also superficial, that my presence was tolerated much in the manner one tolerates that of an ant or fly, until it parks itself in an inconvenient place and has to be dealt with accordingly. And so, keen to keep the peace, and to allow myself the freedom to roam and explore without too much scrutiny, I agreed to Miss Black's terms, and, rather than choosing to cozy up at the bar with the 4 or 5 locals staring into space with absent abandon, I chose to lock myself in my suite on the first floor. The suite is basic, minimal furnishings comprising bed, wardrobe, and writing desk, and a private bathroom accessed via a crooked red door. The desk is by an east-facing window, providing a view of both the market square and the ocean beyond. It's a superb spot to sit and write. I ventured out again at around 2:30 p.m. in order to source provisions for the room. Fortunately, the market was still in full swing on the square, and so I bagged myself several bottles of mineral water, a couple of handfuls of blackberries, a loaf of bread, and 200 grams of honey-glazed ham. Again I was subjected to the same indifferent glances and greetings, forced into the exchange of simple pleasantries with a dozen weather-beaten faces. I was just leaving the square when I noticed some commotion ensuing to the northeast. I made my way towards the din, and attached myself to the rear of what had quickly become a substantial crowd, surrounding a group of ladies atop a small stage. A strange hooting followed, courtesy of the enthusiastic audience. And then the dance began. There were 5 ladies upon the stage, each of them dressed in close-fitting, dark green scale-effect dresses. They wore heavy-looking tap shoes, with which they were hammering out a frantic rhythm. To this rhythm, the audience continued to hoot that bizarre melody. Was it faintly recognizable, that melody, or was there something about its simplicity that made one feel as though they'd heard it many times before? The ladies tapped in unison, their supple bodies invigorated by the crowd's chanting. It was all very odd. Then another lady, a tall elderly lady, climbed onto the stage, carrying a banner of sorts. The dance increased in tempo, the hooting of the audience raised in pitch, and with this ascending chorus, the banner the lady carried was raised into the air. And once again, there it was, in full color, that ghastly tentacled thing with the coalfish head. I took my leave, keen to avoid the climax. The whole thing had stirred something in me, something I didn't like. It had me itching from head to toe. Unable to detach myself from the spectacle, I watched the rest of the performance from the window here in my suite. The ladies departed the stage at 4. The crowd dispersed shortly afterwards. It's been a long day. I think I'll make a ham sandwich and read a book for a couple of hours. There are a few paperbacks in here. The Brittle Kingdom by N. Kane, The Naturalists by P.R. Wonder, and somewhat appropriately, the Jules Verne classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think I'll opt for the latter. Thanks for listening today, folks. Join us again tomorrow for the next part.